everyone. It is my pleasure to be back and to be presenting to you all again. I see some familiar faces from a session that I was part of a couple weeks ago and even just from last year, I think. So I'm very pleased to be presenting on this topic of effective networking and in talking with Alex about this topic and just with others I've been working with over the last year. It's definitely been top of mind for many people as most of us, I think, have been working remotely or just, in working in this virtual environment and thinking about how do we continue to build on and expand our networks for whatever purposes we may be doing that for. So we're going to explore this topic further in this, and I just want to let you know that though I'm bringing content here, I would love to also hear from you all because I know that you're probably all doing this to some extent already, and I'd love for all of you to learn from one another as well. So without further ado, so today we're going to work through first talking about our networking mindset. We're going to talk about how we might consider what our total network is and then how we build it using different approaches and strategies, especially with kind of this layer of being remote or being virtual. And then for kind of the last portion of our workshop, we're also going to go into a little bit more in depth how we might define our professional objective, our core messaging, a little bit about what we call the elevator pitch. Because our workshop is only 1 hour today, some of this may not have as much time as it might warrant. So I do encourage you after the workshop to reflect on some of what we talked about, and of course to do a bit of your own work in reflecting on your own purpose and mission around networking and what you hope to communicate to others. And then I'll also mention some next steps and some resources for you, for those of you who are at Queen's, but also for those of you who may not be, and just some other resources that you would have access to. So I would like to start off with a poll, which I think someone from the Donald Institute will put up, or I guess I have control as well, but it's a series of questions to, just to gauge your level of involvement with networking, what you're interested in, what your goals are around networking. So it's actually a pretty good spread across all the categories, I think, for most of the questions. So I think from number one, that's actually great for me to know that I think it's roughly a third in each for not having participated in networking events. A third of you actually recently, I guess the last event maybe you participated in was in person, and some of you may have more recently participated in something online. You could actually count something like this as networking as well. We'll talk about what we define as networking event, but you can definitely count these workshops. In terms of goals, I think just from seeing the results, a lot about centered on community. So learning about others in community and just solidifying connections in community. And a lot of you, of course, are interested in meeting future collaborators and meeting future individuals who you might work for potentially. And then in terms of preferred networking, predominantly a lot of you do prefer in person, so that's also good for me to know. And again, mostly with structure, but a lot of you also like unstructured as well. And then for the last two questions, just a mix of feelings, definitely, and that's to be expected. Nervousness is definitely a common one that we hear about and we have to work with. That's very interesting too. For number 5, when I attended an online networking event, I feel 36% of you actually said no different, which is quite interesting because a lot of people do feel more nervous about that. Again, just everybody, will land on a different spot on the spectrum, but many of you are feeling confident, which is great to hear as well. All right, so by the end of the workshop, my goal is that you'll have a better understanding of the value and the purpose of networking. Again, just really thinking about the networking strategies that you can utilize, how you might initiate networking conversations naturally in a memorable way. And then the last part, which again we'll get into a little bit more, is what key messages you yourself want to include when you're talking to others. So in terms of accomplishments or abilities or aspirations, what are those things that you want to make sure are highlighted to the person you're talking to? So I'm interested, I think I already have a sense of where your experience is with networking. Um, so maybe actually at this point, I want to focus on the third question of what kind of networking have you done or hope to do while remote? So some of you already indicated that you have done some remote. So I'm interested, maybe if you can put in the chat box what that networking was like, just to for the whole group to get a sense of what people's experiences have been. Or if you haven't, what do you hope to maybe try out, or you've been wanting to jump into something into some networking but haven't had a chance yet? Anyone at all in the chat box? Don't overthink it. Just whatever kind of events or workshops or webinars you've been part of. Okay, so conferences, of course, have been virtual. So Connor has said networking at conferences. I think usually these days they have like built-in time that is like a breakout room or time for you to more casually connect with others. Great, so chatting with profs who may be present at conferences. Okay, again, also conferences, so that's been a big theme. That's good for me to know. Well, it's good to know that conferences are still running. They're very, very proactive and still being engaging, hopefully. All right. Well, thank you for your responses. So we're going to start off by talking about our networking mindset. So oftentimes when I'm talking with, in my case, like working with students at Queen's, there's usually like some apprehension around networking. People think like it's something that is super challenging, or it's only for a certain kind of person who can do it very naturally. And so there's a stereotype or this myth that networking is about like convincing everyone how great you are. There's a perception that about like using people to like get something or to reach your own goal. This is less so the case virtually, but sometimes when it's an in-person event, people think networking is about just collecting contacts, right? Or how many people can I add to my LinkedIn profile? However, what we encourage you to think about instead is networking as conversations that explore interests. It's conversations that help you to research strategies, organizations, and trends that might be helpful to you in your applications. Networking is opportunities to share and help others as well. So it's a reciprocal relationship where you're maybe not immediately, but at a certain point, you're able to also give back or be able to help this other person as well. So it's not just a one-way street. And ultimately, networking, when done well, helps to produce long-term results and helps to create a sustainable relationship that's between you and the other person, instead of just a transactional aspect where you're asking for something or for that person to do something for you. And so I always say to people I work with or to students I work with in talking about networking is that you actually already know how to do this. So although you may feel, nervousness, lack of confidence in maybe what to say and all the, the range of feelings that you indicated on the poll, you already possess actually a lot of what you need to go out and initiate these conversations. And at the heart of it, it's because networking really is essentially friendliness and curiosity, and really a focus on having a conversation. So again, people sometimes wait to do networking until they're actually desperately, in need of a job, for example, or desperately wanting information. And that's why we encourage you, even if you're not, actively job searching right now, even if you're just at a point right now you're comfortable, but you're kind of looking ahead to the future, this is something to be intentional about to do even early on, because you want to be having these conversations already and continue to have these conversations moving forward. So keep that in mind. And again, everybody's at a different point. And then some of you already are doing this very organically and very naturally. But of course, right now during the pandemic, we're not seeing people as much. Everything's more scheduled, more, maybe less fluid, or you don't bump into people in the hallway or see people on campus. And so this might take a bit more of an intentional effort to reach out to somebody or to message them on Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you use, and check in with people. So one thing about networking I do also want to touch on, which doesn't change whether it's in person or online, is that usually when it comes to the work of career planning, it's something that people indicate as important, but not always urgent. So I'm using this table to illustrate my point. So for example, if something is due tomorrow, writing a resume to apply for something, or you have an interview tomorrow, and you would do so right away because it's important and it's urgent. However, what's important, so what most people would indicate is important, but not as urgent, is things like, building your network or doing research on career options, making an appointment to talk to a career counselor or career coach. These are things that we tend to push off and, say, we'll do it next week, we'll do it when we're less busy, but we don't actually get around to it because we pushed it off and then sometimes we forget about it. So I do encourage you to consider that, right? Not just about networking, but in general about career planning, to consider what are some ways in which you can break down your goals so that they're more attainable, they're not as overwhelming, and helps you to move ahead and move forward. So now we're going to talk about how we might determine and grow our network. So a lot of times with our network, we don't often think of people that we're already connected with. So I like to show this diagram to indicate, for example, if you imagine yourself as the center of your network, so in this case, like this little red circle, you in the middle, and then you think about, again, just people that you're already connected with or very naturally. So it might be, your colleagues, fellow colleagues at the McDonald Institute. It might be people you've gotten to know at your institution. It might be, your supervisor or manager that you worked under in a previous job, in a summer job, part-time job, anything like that. Other kinds of supervisors, but also like people like your family friends, friends or acquaintances from previous degrees or previous institutions, people you meet at conferences. Obviously, your connection with these individuals will vary. Some of them will be more familiar than others. But when you actually start mapping out who these individuals are, you'll find that your total network is actually larger than you previously imagined. And a lot of times we just forget that, or we don't necessarily see these people as part of a network because we maybe know them really well or don't know them really well. But in fact, these could be really good sources of information and people who can link you with others who you otherwise wouldn't meet. So this might be a good exercise to do. It's just to do a kind of like a mind map of connecting yourself to everyone that you actually would count as a contact. So in terms of networking, again, people often think of like their networks or contacts having to be people who are in positions of hiring. So like a supervisor or like a director or HR manager. And so they really think of it as a linear relationship where you network with somebody, you talk with somebody, and it leads to a job offer. So very like a one-step process. But in fact, in reality, you might connect or reach out to somebody to talk. They might connect you to another conversation or network. They may also be somebody who helps you to understand key skills of a particular job you're interested in. It could also be that they help you to learn more about the organization they work in or the priorities of the industry that they've been working in for the last 20 years. And then from there, there could be different kinds of connections. It could be more than one of these aspects. And ultimately, what comes out of it is that maybe that person helps you to create a more targeted application. And that can make all the difference in terms of standing out in the pool of, say like 10, 20, 100 applicants, even depending on how competitive the job is. They maybe help to connect you to a hiring manager. It might not be immediately, but maybe down the road, an opportunity comes up and that connection is solidified. And then in some cases, it can lead to a job offer. And maybe your initial intent wasn't even to look for a job, right? But maybe down the road, again, just in terms of thinking long-term, this helps you down the road to get into a certain industry, or it helps you to get into a certain organization that you're interested in. And so when it comes to remote networking, some of these, again, we've talked about already, but really think about how some of your, or how your existing network has maybe moved online. And you might have to, just be staying on top of these things a little bit more. But even outside of the kind of academic educational environment, thinking about other groups and associations that you might be part of, professionally, culturally, athletically, religiously, in all these different contexts, and see and consider how they may be still offering ways to connect and to maintain your network in those ways. Again, we talked about this already, but taking advantage of online social and professional gatherings that's already set up for you. So whether it's through McDonald Institute or again, just through other contexts, oftentimes like we don't necessarily have to initiate ourselves. We just have to sign up and show up, right? And be participants in whatever event or webinar that's taking place. But if you do, and to do so proactively, that's also a way to be networking and getting to know who else is in that space. And of course, another thing you can do is continue to set up, chats, what we call informational interviews with people, just virtually instead of in person. And I think by this point, I think in the pandemic, most people are pretty comfortable or comfortable enough to talk with somebody else or talk with strangers one-on-one. And so it's a matter of, again, just kind of getting to that point where you're setting goals for yourself and thinking about who it is that you actually want to talk to. And of course, other events like webinars, conferences, and other PD opportunities. And then I also put this point in just for you to keep in mind is that if you are looking or interested in like learning more about industry, for example, at Queen's, and I know at other institutions, our career fairs have moved virtually. And so just being aware of when those are taking place, if employers are holding online informational sessions to be part of those as well. Just checking the questions, make sure I didn't miss anything there. And then there's other ideas you have at this point, maybe something I didn't put in as a bullet point, feel free to throw it into the chat box, just so that you can share it with everyone else, but I'm gonna move forward. I also wanted to kind of put some of these points in terms of thinking about how you might be proactive in initiating conversations. So although, reaching out to strangers might be a little bit intimidating, again, some of the things that you naturally participate in, like say webinars, conferences, sessions, and things like that, already have built-in ways in which you can engage with others. So, when you're in a breakout room, being proactive, getting to know those who are in the breakout room with you. It might be that you're writing down other people's names so that, if you had a good conversation, you can follow up afterwards. You can add them to LinkedIn or to a social media network that you're active on. You might request follow-up conversations to discuss further something that you discussed during the event itself. You can also, for example, reach out with questions or feedback post-event to the organizers. Again, just other ways in which you can continue to have conversations without naturally having to, like cold call or like cold reach out to somebody else. And one resource that's really easy for you to get on right away is a group called Queen's Connects. And unfortunately, this is only for Queen's students and alumni. So this is specific to Queen's affiliated individuals, unfortunately. But all institutions have probably some form of this in some way. So I encourage you to check it out. If you're not able to find something like this, to reach out to your respective career center. But at Queen's, we have this LinkedIn group that's set up specifically so that students and alumni can connect. So the link will be on that URL that's on the page there. And what's great about this is that this space is specifically curated for students to ask questions, to reach out and connect with alumni who may be, doing or in careers they're interested in, or to ask questions about how they got to be doing what they're doing. And alumni usually join the group because they want to give back and want to support students. So overall, like it's a great win-win for everybody in terms of connecting and also being able to give back to Queens and to help students as well, many of whom are graduating or just kind of considering their next steps. On LinkedIn, more generally, sorry, you can also join groups that are specific to certain topics. So I just did a quick screen grab, sorry, of policy groups that if you just look for with keywords, you can pops up a lot of them. You may have to filter through some and just read through what exactly their scope is and what topics they talk about or how active they are. If you're particularly interested, for example, in say a Canadian context, you might want to put in like Canada or Canadian to just filter out some of those groups. But it's a great way, again, to just be in this virtual space that people are talking about topics you're interested in. Great, I see in the chat that someone's mentioned about McGill having a great network. Yeah, and a lot of you, you know, just from your previous institutions, like you're alumni of those institutions. So make sure that you take advantage of the services and supports that they have as well. Just one further kind of letting you know about with LinkedIn, if you go to any institution's LinkedIn page, there's actually an alumni feature that you can click on, and it actually pops up a database of everybody on the LinkedIn platform who's affiliated with that institution. So you can actually use keywords again to search for alumni who work in certain institutions, or organizations who graduated with a certain major or from a certain program. And so you can just play around with the keywords and be able to find and discover what people have done after graduating and where they're working now or where they're living now. So this is just a quick screenshot of some of the built-in filters that LinkedIn has. So you can see they separated by industry, but also by organization. So I encourage you to check that out. Again, you just go to any of the institution LinkedIn page and click on alumni. And so when you're reaching out to do informational interviews, again, just consider, you know, these are conversations you're having and with a focus on not getting a job necessarily, but really for research. So you're gathering more data about possible options, about maybe a specific kind of option that that person can speak on. And so, you know, reach out to people who are doing things that interest you. And when you're reaching out, try to set it up in a way that's easy for people to say yes to. So it might be that, I guess, depending on who you're reaching out to, you know that person's really busy. So maybe being specific to say, you know, if you are able to spare 15 minutes, like I would love to chat with you about this, right? And then really pick something that they can really speak on easily. And then also when you're reaching out, so that previous example could be via email. And so I also want to include an example of you reaching out to somebody maybe you don't know as well, like a complete stranger that you found on LinkedIn, and you're trying to you know, get a response or maximize the chances that you get a response. So we recommend this structure that's from the 2-Hour Job Search, and that's actually a really good book I would also recommend. But in that, Dalton recommends what's called a 5-point outreach message. So essentially, you want to keep it to fewer than 100 words, very short and sweet. Again, not a mention of jobs. You want to start the message with a warm connection. So in many cases for us, it might be that it's a connection through the educational or academic kind of environment. It might be that we have a mutual friend or acquaintance. So start with like some kind of connection just to kick it off. And then you want to really get into, you know, why did you message them? Like, how did you find them? Why you're messaging them specifically? And, you know, what your goals and interests are in talking with them. And then also what's really helpful to kind of help set you up for continuing the conversation is indicate how you might follow up, just in case they are really busy and maybe they lose track of your message, then you feel comfortable reaching out again, but in a way that is respectful of their time. So you'll see in the message on the right, Lindsay has reached out to Tom, and she has said, my name is Lindsay. I'm currently a Master of Industrial Relations student at Queen's. I found your profile when I was researching career pathways on LinkedIn. And then the ask, would you be willing to connect for a quick 20-minute chat for me to ask you further about your experiences at IMRIS, presumably somewhere that he had worked previously or currently. I'm exploring careers in medical environments and your insights would be very helpful. And then she ends with, I realize that this may be a very busy time for you, so let me know what would be most convenient for you in terms of connecting. If right now isn't a good time, let me know and I'll be happy to reconnect at a future point. And so that also leaves him an opening if he's not able to help you at this point for whatever reason, that this conversation can also end on a very gracious note as well. And so again, just keeping it short and very brief, but also very specific to what your ask is as well. Great, I see there's a lot of good conversations happening in the chat. So thanks for sharing all those resources, everybody. And then I just want to offer this example through email. In this case, this is Tim reaching out to Paul, and it's after having talked or having had a conversation previously about his job search. And so this is presumably someone, you know, that you have a relationship with, and you're who's comfortable receiving an update about your progress and wanting to actually have a genuine interest on what's going on with you. So Tim is writing to Paul, and at this point, he's identified that he would really like to explore opportunities in organizational behavior. And the next step for me, he says, would be to talk to insiders in the field. And so the second paragraph, he's saying, he's asking, would you happen to know anyone who is or has worked for any of the organizations I have listed at the bottom of this email? So what he's asking for is basically for Paul to recommend or to connect him with people that he could reach out to. And the rest of the second paragraph really is to make it easy for Paul then to say forward the email and then to make that connection for him. One thing I will say about this email, again, is that you wouldn't write this email just to anybody. Again, it would be somebody who you feel pretty confident would be okay to share contacts with you, who, you know, you've had enough of a conversation with that they are very clear of what your interests are, and thus would link you with the right kind of people to continue the conversation. And so obviously you want to tailor this to your own tone, your own writing style, but really keeping in mind, you know, how much is appropriate to ask of this other person depending on your relationship. So it is sometimes a little bit more of an art with networking of like these considerations of what to ask for, when to ask for it, is it appropriate to ask? And so again, you know, you may want to start small and just ask for maybe like, is there like one or two other people they would recommend you to talk to instead of just a whole list of organizations that might be asking for too much. So please do modify this as needed, but I wanted to show an example to show what a potential email could look like. Any questions so far?
So far, just great conversation happening in the chat. Thanks, Jenny.
Great. Yeah, if anybody else has other thoughts on, you know, some of these approaches I've talked about, feel free to also throw those into the chat box too. And then I'll also mention in terms of in the online format too, is that there are a lot of different platforms which we may or may not be on, and doesn't mean that we need to be on all of them. But depending on what you like what your preference is for using certain ones, or maybe certain industries are very active on certain platforms, you may want to also have a presence there as well, again, to just connect with people who are working in that industry, working in that field, to continue those conversations. So particularly, I know that like LinkedIn usually has a certain kind of persona in terms of writing certain articles and posting on there. So a lot of different industries or different fields will be on LinkedIn. Twitter is another one that's always been popular. And a lot of times people will use hashtags to kind of get in on certain conversations, share opinions, share publications, share articles and resources. So again, just depending on your field and seeing the who's who and where they are active, you may also want to be present again and just to see what they're writing about and talking about. This is some other ones. The Facebook, Instagram, most people perhaps use those more for personal use, which is fine. That's the case for me. But sometimes there are ways in which these platforms do overlap, and you might find that there are good accounts to follow, right? Or people on those platforms that you might connect with. And of course, for those of you in research, there are also other, I know, networking sites as well. So just keeping in mind, again, of what others are using to stay active and be aware of what's going on in your field. Discord is actually one that's new to me, so that's really interesting. I'll have to reread the chat again, but I see a couple of people talking about that. All right, so we're going to talk about how we might define our professional objective and core message at this time. So as we were talking about informational interviews and reaching out to contact people, these are just the 3 questions for us to think about. So what are you curious about? Figuring out who knows about this, and then determining how to approach them. So the preparation is really key when you're preparing for the conversation. So again, this might actually even happen even before you reach out, right? So the whole aspect of understanding what you're asking for will come out when you actually reach out to that person. So it's really important to have that reflective aspect built in before you're actively reaching out and asking people to connect, because in the conversation, it will become very apparent of whether or not you know what you're asking for, or you actually know what you're asking that person for in terms of information. So some things to consider: what are your key stories? What areas do you want to grow in? What will be useful to this person to know about you? If it's about a particular focus on an industry or company, think about what kind of research you can do ahead of time, even before talking with somebody. So, doing a good scan of the organizational websites, industry websites, it might be publications or resources that come from that organization or industry. Particularly if you're honing in on questions about certain companies, you might want to be familiar with like the mission statement or the goals of those organizations. And then knowing the position. So this is more specific of if you're interested to know more about someone's like current career role or something they've done in the past. You don't need to, again, like you're there to ask them questions, but to have a good idea, maybe just of what are the key skills that's needed, or at least some idea of that. And then asking them, what are the challenges of the role? How does this role play in the larger company and industry? So having prepared questions are going to be helpful as you reach out and ask and approach people to provide time to connect with you. So again, just thinking about ultimately, what is your goal of this conversation? So now we're going to go into more of kind of breaking down the different aspects of what might come out in a conversation. So as we just talked about, having a goal, having an objective is really key. So I'm going to get you to actually do some reflection now at this point. So again, I know all of you are at different points of your professional development and where you're at in terms of, or differences in terms of what you're looking for career-wise. But I want you to write down or jot some notes down of what kind of work you're looking for, or maybe a potential career post-graduation. So it could be 1 to 2 sentences long, something that's not too broad. So something that is, could be applicable to every field, but also something that's not too specific, like I want to be a business development analyst, or I want to be blank at this organization. And so when I work with people on defining a professional objective, there's actually a lot of different aspects to consider. And so these can all end up sounding a little bit different. But sometimes people consider their interests, their skills, their values also come out through this. Personality, long-term goals, your mission and purpose, all can come through this objective as well. So it's kind of, again, your professional goal of your networking or of your conversations that you're having. So I'll give you just a minute kind of to reflect and to think about that.
This is where I failed to have music ready for you, Jenny.
That's okay. I'm used to it now.
Well, and maybe if there are some brave souls in our audience that would like to share theirs in the chat or with us afterwards, maybe you already have that in mind, but yeah, I'm interested to see what people's personal, professional objectives are for sure.
And remember, these are not set in stone. So if you are comfortable enough to share it, we're not going to hold you to that and be like, oh, you didn't do what you said 2 years ago in this workshop. So yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable sharing, I would love to read it. I think there's a couple. Great. Well, thank you for being courageous and to share that. Yeah, feel free to keep that coming as you're writing. Okay. And then next, I also want you then to consider something called what I call the core message. And so, well, actually not what I call it. It's also from another book, so I didn't make this up. But your core message essentially is how you persuade others that you're qualified for your professional objective. So in your conversations, what do you want people to remember you by, right? What are the positive attributes, strengths, and experiences that you want them to know about you? So to help us with this, I'm just checking the messages here. Great. I'm actually going to focus in on the stories that we tell in those conversations, right? And this usually translates to making yourself actually be more memorable to people. So I want you to think about what is something, first of all, what is something specific that you're proud of accomplishing personally or professionally? So again, this is something for you to write down or to reflect on. So for example, I am proud of restructuring my student club's annual conference to be more accessible and engaging for my peers. Okay. For those of you who are done, if you can write 2 more specific moments from any personal or professional experiences that make you proud of yourself, also do so. Okay, I'll give you a little bit more time on this, but I want you to write down at least one skill that you feel you developed through each of these accomplishments or experience. And I recognize that skills is a broad topic that maybe not everyone is familiar with or can easily think about. So one resource I've mentioned in previous workshops before is our Queen's Skills Cards. And so I recommend go through first, don't jump to the resource right away, but again, reflect on hopefully you have at least one thing that you're proud of that you've written down. But if you have written down another one or even 2 more, try to identify a skill that you feel like you've developed through that has, either you've expanded, you've enhanced, that you feel would be a strength that you bring forward into anything that you would do. Great, well, feel free to keep on adding that. And I know there's opportunities for you guys to chat later on after my workshop. So, hang on to these ideas. We'll have to capture the chat in some way. Are you saving the chat? Okay, great. That's amazing.
Certainly can.
All right, so I'm going to move to the next step, but keep on working on this if you're still putting down some thoughts. And so with these things that you've written down that you're proud of, that when you reflect on, you've developed skills, the next step then is to actually translate them into more coherent stories that you would then communicate to others. And so you'd obviously want to translate it in a way that's appropriate to your target audience. How you might share that proud moment with your family might be different than how you share it with potential manager or in a job interview. But you want to try and think about how do these skills that I'm proud of and have developed relate in context to that organization or that position, right? What has that looked like in action that relates to what you might do in that setting that you're hoping to get into? And so these stories actually demonstrate your mindset and your values in the way that you tell the story as well, not just what happened in the content, but also in how you describe it, that approach that you took really comes out in these accomplishment stories. So here's an example that is about somebody who's reflecting on their role as a TA, particularly in this past year. So this person wrote, throughout my role as a TA, I've deepened and developed exceptional communication skills and the ability to understand how to use different levels of communication with different audiences. Particularly during the pandemic, I worked closely with a professor whose course I was supporting to adapt his course content and instructional strategies to an online format. I advocated for increased accessibility and flexibility for students and helped to find alternative methods of assessments which increase student engagement. And so this person, they could actually have even gone more in depth and included more specific examples of the techniques they use or strategies they use. But a lot of times, when I have looked at or talked with, say, graduate students specifically about the accomplishments, a lot of times people haven't actually reflected as in depth about their TA-ship or RA-ship. And when we actually get talking about it, they've actually done incredible work in that capacity. So don't underestimate, again, just within the academic setting or even outside of academic setting, the skills that you've developed through these roles that you may have held for a number of years or just count as just part of your degree or part of your program. But in fact, you're developing skills that can be transferable to other contexts. So I want to give you a chance to, I'm just looking at time here. Oh, we're at 3:30. But not to lose kind of the momentum we have. Just look at the list that you have of, again, the moments or accomplishments that you listed or thought of. And I want you to pick one of them. And I want you to start to jot down some points that you might weave into a story later on that really focuses on the relevant skills that many of you have already talked about. So for example, I don't want to pick on anyone's example, put you on the spot, but there were a few about communication skills, like say relating to making posters or social media presence or working with people, right? So if communication is the broader skill, think about, instead of just saying, I developed strong communication skills around it, what is a story that you can tell about the specific communication skill that you have honed? How did you utilize it in that specific context? And if you want to, like how that might transfer to other settings, or maybe what you learned from that experience. So feel free to jot down some points, and then that way, when you come back to it later, you don't lose sight of maybe some ideas you had at this point. All right, so hang on to those thoughts. I'm going to just continue on to just wrap up and give you some next steps and resources. So with these stories, just to mention quickly about the elevator pitch, what you would end up doing is kind of putting them all together as kind of building blocks. And although you may not say the same message to everyone in the same way, you may want to consider kind of the three aspects of introduction, your objective, which we just talked about, and then also what we just talked about is accomplishments and experiences. And so when you're communicating with somebody, you may want to have all these components so that they're clear what your objective is again. And then also you can back up your objective or your goal with some related or relevant experiences you already have had and the skills that you've developed through that. So just quick note about the elevated pitch. It should be around between 30 to 60 seconds. It's a way to introduce yourself quickly and effectively. And it's really something that's versatile if you're comfortable enough with it that you could use not just for interviews or fairs or that kind of like more formal setting, but it's useful for kind of any conversation you have. Maybe it's bumping into acquaintance or somebody new at a coffee shop later down the road, maybe not right now. It might be when you're in a conference kind of setting and you're in a breakout room. It makes it easy for you to kind of kick off the conversation. So being, again, just reflective of even tentative next goals, your professional objective, and then some of your, again, relevant experiences will help to present yourself in a confident way. All right, so I wanted to just wrap up by just encouraging you to really set goals for yourself around networking. I know it's a very big topic, but I wanted to include this quote from Stephen Covey from his book, where he says that only 3% of people actually write down their goals, but of those 3%, 97% achieve them successfully within a desired time frame. So even if it's one goal you're writing down as a result of this workshop, that may be something that will help you to move ahead. So, I encourage you to write down something right now that you could do maybe in the next, say, 4 months, maybe in the next month, something that's realistic, that's specific and measurable as a goal for you, especially in the context of networking. And then also if you're stuck, here's some recommendations. So you could start with mapping out your current contacts. So what I showed you earlier in terms of that mind map. And then from there, you could even list out specifically, like, who are 5 people you want to connect with? What are some ways that you can actually schedule something in or reach out to these people and have one-on-one conversations? It might be following up and having informational interviews with 3 people. Maybe joining an interest group online, professional association, maybe a LinkedIn group. Maybe he's updating your LinkedIn profile. I hear that a lot from individuals. Setting a goal for how you want to update it. Again, maybe getting involved in certain forums and groups that are about topics you're interested in. And then last but not the last thing you do is working on your elevator pitch or your introduction. Maybe it's just getting a draft and then running it by people, practicing on people, booking an appointment at your career center to work on it. And then again, I just wanted to also let you know, for those of you who are at Queen's or affiliated with Queen's, if you do want to access additional supports, we do have appointments via phone or Microsoft Teams. You can just log on to our website, which is careers.queensu.ca, and then log on to just find an appointment. We have virtual drop-ins, which you can also find on our website. And lots of resources available, which you can, is actually publicly accessible. So anybody can also go to our website and look at our tip sheets, the skills cards, as I linked to before. So feel free to peruse our website. Yeah, so I apologize for going over time, but I did want to give a quick chance. Does anyone have any last questions?